Members, you will have been sad to hear the news of the death of Peter McAvoy, former Head of Education for Secondary and Inclusion at the Council, who retired in 2016. Sheena Devlin, a colleague and friend of Peter, has provided the following obituary to share with you all today, as she's not able to attend today's Council meeting. Peter McAvoy was a formidable colleague to many. He was an even more formidable friend to many more. He was a man who was principled, intelligent, compassionate, honest, and fair. He liked people and people liked him. He had a razor-sharp wit and a sense of mischief. That meant working and socializing with Peter were joyous occasions. He loved teaching and often spoke with great fondness and some pride about his career, particularly the times he spent as head teacher of both Islay and Crieff High Schools. Peter experienced the very worst in life when his son, called Peter, a talented footballer with a great career in the game ahead of him, died at the age of just 22. It was the mark of Peter McAvoy that he was able to bring light to many from this his darkest time. Peter embarked on a program of raising awareness for undiagnosed heart conditions in young people, while simultaneously raising funds for a charitable trust, Hash for Pete, in his son's name. The money raised is used to fund free heart screening to young people across Perth and Kinross and Dundee. What a legacy to leave behind. We know that in the past 4 years, many lives have been saved as a result of this screening, and many families have been spared the heartache and anguish which befell Peter. For the past year, Peter also worked with the Youth Philanthropy Initiative that saw him back in schools in Perth and Kinross, where he helped guide and support young people in their quest to develop as responsible citizens. Peter loved doing this, and our schools loved having him involved. He was a man of character who will be sorely missed by so very many. And our thoughts are with his widow Anne and his daughter Gillian. Members, can I ask everyone to stand for a minute's silence in tribute? Thank you, members. First of all, I would like to welcome members of the public to today's meeting. Welcome. Can I remind councillors and officers to use microphones and request that those attending the meeting ensure that all mobile phones and other communication devices are in silent mode and that you stand while speaking. I would also remind those attending the meeting that it will be recorded and be available on YouTube via the Council's website following the meeting. Are there any apologies for today's meeting?
Provost, I have no apologies intimated for this meeting.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in respect of business today? Nope. Item 3, it's the proposed local development plan representation and proposed responses. I would like to advise on some procedural matters for today's meeting that were referred to in the briefing notes sent to members in advance of this meeting. Firstly, can I remind members that, as the report makes clear, The proposed local development plan must be consistent with the Strategic Development Plan, the TAY plan, and take account of a range of documents produced by the Scottish Government and others. Members who intend to put forward amendments today should have had cognizance of these points in their preparation for this meeting and have sought officers' advice accordingly. Members should also be aware that if it is considered that any proposed amendment may not be consistent with the TAY plan or with any other documents, then I will seek a short adjournment of the meeting while the situation is clarified. I would also remind members that any amendments must relate to the representations which were submitted to the Council by the 2nd of February 2018. Members will note the updated list of Schedule 4 documents that were circulated yesterday. Secondly, the report will be dealt with in the following way. I will be asking Jim Valentine, Deputy Chief Executive and Chief Operating Officer, to introduce the report. I will allow members the opportunity to ask questions on each section of the report. I will then also ask Councillor Lyle to speak to the report and to move the motion. And then I will ask for any amendments in the following order. Amendments on recommendations 1 to 5. Amendments on recommendation 6 to Schedule 4 documents. And amendments on recommendation 7 to 12. If required, I will seek a 30-minute adjournment to allow members to seek clarification from officers to the possible impact of the amendment. Thirdly, Standing Order 57 provides that where there is more than one amendment, the amendments require to be put against each other until only one amendment remains, and the vote is then taken between the motion and that amendment. However, in considering the representations to the proposed local development plan, it is possible that amendments could come forward in respect of all or parts of the proposed plan, which are unrelated. For example, not competing against each other and consequently applying the terms of Standing Order 57 would not be appropriate. Accordingly, in that situation, the requirements of Standing Order 57 will require to be suspended, and unrelated amendments will be voted on their individual merits against the motion. Is that agreed? Thank you. Where there are competing amendments, these will be dealt with in the usual manner. Are there any questions on these procedural points? No. Can I also clarify that I intend to enforce Standing Order 51 to limit contributions to a maximum of 5 minutes each to allow as many contributions as possible. The Deputy Provost will advise as your contribution is near the 5 minutes. I will now hand you over to the Deputy Chief Executive, Jim Valentine, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. Good afternoon, councillors. The local development plan sets out this council's vision for the future. It is the framework for a vibrant economy and strong communities. The plan has gone through due process and has been subject of an extensive consultation process, resulting in the receipt of 742 representations. Having received these representations, the council has the option either to submit the plan to Scottish ministers for examination or to modify the plan before submitting it to the ministers. Where the authority decides to make modifications, the plan must then be republished and allow additional time in which further representations may be made and then considered. Clearly, this means a delay in the time required to achieve an adopted plan. Statute requires the local development plan to be updated every 5 years, and it should be noted that this target will be missed, as the plan was adopted in February 2014. The delay occurred due to the time taken by the Scottish ministers to approve TAY plan. Nevertheless, further delays beyond June 2019 will leave the council open to claims the plan is now out of date. This can introduce uncertainty in the development management process and represents a particular risk for the Council at appeal. This report therefore recommends that the Council does not make any notifiable modifications. Members should note that the ability to indicate to the reporter areas where the Council sees merit in the representations gives the Council the ability to influence the reporter's final recommendation and the final content of the plan. This approach avoids the time delay inherent with a modified plan. In relation to the current adopted plan, in over 90% of cases where the Council indicated to the reporter that they saw merit in a representation, the reporter duly upheld that representation. The report recommends that the Council sends the plan, along with the representations, to Scottish Ministers and the Directorate of Planning and Environment Appeals. The Council's response to unresolved issues, referred to as Schedule 4s, will also be forwarded to the reporters for their examination. The planning team and I are happy to take any questions you may have.
Are there any questions of Deputy? No. Thank you. I'll just move on. Are there any questions on the following sections of the report? General issues, Schedule General issues, Schedule 18. Policy Schedules 1 to 4. Perth Strategic Development Areas, Perth City Schedules 5 to 6. Perth Core Settlements, Greater Perth out with Core Schedules 7 to 8. Greater Dundee Housing Market Area Schedule 9. Highland Area Schedules 10 to 11. Kinross Area Schedule 12-13. Strathearn Area Schedule 14 and 15. And Strathmore Area Schedule 16 to 17. No questions? Then I'll invite Councillor Lyle to move the motion.
Thank you, Provost. Good afternoon, Councillors. This report is one of the most important reports which comes before this Council, setting our land use policies for the long term and shaping our future communities. The decisions arising from this strategic plan will influence future generations, and I must say that I am grateful for the time and the effort which the public, Council officers and elected members have put in throughout their briefings, consultation events and the decisions that we've arrived at in this report before you today. The plan clearly sets out our ambitions for communities. It highlights our strategic development sites concentrated on Perth City, alongside the future plans to ensure sustainable economic growth across our boroughs and settlements. The period of representation on the plan generated a healthy response, with a significant number of people supporting comments, as well as the expected level of objections. As the local development plan is for the whole of Perth and Kinross, it includes significant land allocations and a wide range of policies. And, as you're all no doubt aware, it would be impossible to resolve all these objections. The purpose of the period of representations was to ensure that the public had the opportunity to lodge representations, and where these could not be agreed or otherwise resolved, they will be dealt with by the independent reporters through examination of the proposed plan. I trust we can agree today not to modify the plan, but to submit it to Scottish Ministers for examination. This will ensure that we have an up-to-date development plan supporting the sustainable economic growth of our area and guiding our development up to 2028 and beyond. I therefore move the paper and ask councillors to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Can I invite Councillor Barrett to second the motion? There we go. I'll now ask if there are any amendments seeking these in accordance with the previously advised order as set out in the appended note. Are there any amendments in relation to recommendations 1 to 5? Policies schedule 1 to 4. Have you got?
Yes, Provost, I've got an amendment with permission.
Thank you. Have you a seconder?
I do have a seconder, Councillor Barnacle.
Thank you.
Provost, with permission, I would like to bring forward an amendment regarding placemaking policy 1D in the new local development plan relating to site capacity ranges. And in doing so, I'd like to thank Mr. Marshall from the planning team for his help in confirming the text of the amendment. The draft policy currently states that sites allocated in the plan for housing development have a capacity range identified. Only in exceptional circumstances will permission be granted for proposals which fall out with the identified range. The new site capacity ranges with lower and upper bounds replace the previously included single numbers attached to each housing site from the 2014 Local Development Plan. The new ranges and policy were included in the draft plan following cross-party discussions and agreement last year as part of a working group including Councillors Anderson, Gray, Lyle, Wilson and me, and not forgetting Councillor Barnacle, whom I'm pleased is seconding my amendment today. The objective of the new site capacity ranges and policy 1D was to tackle the dichotomy between community expectations of how many houses might be built on a neighbouring site and the number of houses eventually consented for such sites. In fact, I am advised that the majority of approved major applications have exceeded the site housing numbers identified in the 2014 Local Development Plan. In the past, this has occasionally led to friction between communities, developers, planners and elected members who are ultimately asked to decide on individual applications. In introducing Policy 1D and the site capacity ranges, it was hoped that greater certainty could be given to our residents about how many new houses they could expect to see in their communities over the lifetime of the plan, and this was the expectation when the plan went out to public consultation last year. In reviewing the content of the public responses to the draft plan, I've been advised by officers that a breach of a site capacity range in the new plan, and therefore of Policy 1D, would not be sufficient grounds in and of itself to recommend or to move refusal of an application. It seems to me that this would be seen by our communities as abandoning one of the commitments that we have made to them in introducing the new policy and ranges. And my amendment therefore seeks to remedy this situation by simplifying the wording of the policy so that it could be enforceable on a standalone basis. In recognising that a formal modification to the draft plan at this point would necessitate going out to public consultation again, thus potentially delaying the adoption of the new plan beyond the statutory date outlined by the Deputy Chief Executive, I'm seeking Council's agreement with this amendment to request that the wording be changed by the Scottish Government's reporter at the examination stage of the new plan. The key wording of the amended policy would be: sites allocated in the plan for housing development have a capacity range identified. Applications which exceed the identified capacity range will not be permitted. And there are some consequential changes to the remainder of the wording and to some of the Schedule 4 responses as outlined in the text of my amendment. If I may, Provost, and following discussions with fellow councillors and others, I would like to directly address some questions that have been put to me about the effect of this amendment. Some members have raised concerns with me that the amended policy could prove restrictive and would not allow any exceptional circumstances to be considered in relation to an individual application. So I would like to reassure members on two fronts. Firstly, in the case of each and every site, the upper limit of the calculated capacity range in the draft plan is in excess of the quoted single figure in the 2014 plan, and thus the calculated ranges already take into account the fact that there may be exceptional circumstances relating to an individual site. And secondly, my clear understanding is that councillors could still recommend the setting aside of a breach of the policy and move approval of an application, but the default presumption will shift to be in favour of upholding the policy and the range for any individual site. If there is no default understanding that the policy will be upheld, then we should not hold out false hope to our communities and would have to question the point of having introduced the policy in the first place. As an aside, it is interesting to note that 4 objections to the introduction of the policy were received from developers, and that they requested either the deletion of the policy or that the ranges be returned to an indicative status, and thus this despite the fact that the new plan actually increases the total housing numbers from the 2014 plan. Provost, changing the wording of the policy as requested in my amendment will do the following. It will set clear parameters for our developers. It will confirm our community's expectations of the local development plan that they have been consulted on, and it will give clear guidance to officers and elected members when assessing and determining major applications that come before them. Provost, with this new local development plan, the Council is sending out the clear message that Perth Kinross is open for business. But more than that, my hope is, by setting these clear expectations and parameters, that we will give greater certainty to both our house builders and our residents, and that we will be able to move on from past tensions and conflict. In short, that we will instil trust in the planning process and good neighbourliness between our residents, developers, planners and councillors for the benefit of all. Provost, I beg leave to move my amendment and commend it to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Barnacle.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I'm happy to second Councillor Stewart's amendment. I was content for the MOG to suggest replacing the old site capacity system with a range. I did, however, suspect that it would be far too generous to the development sector, and note with interest that Homes for Scotland wish to consider maintaining the discredited approach of seeing site numbers as indicative only. The amendment seeks to address this by ensuring that the maximum number of houses for the site per the plan is at least adhered to, which will give communities more certainty on levels of development to expect. Hopefully we can all agree this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle.
I also have an amendment on the same
I've not
item.
come to you yet.
Sorry?
I will come to. Have you got something on the Perth Strategic Development Areas, Perth City, Schedule 5 to 6?
No, it's Schedule 4.
Okay. Perth Strategic Development Areas, Perth City, Schedule 5-6. Are there any amendments? Perth Core Settlements, Greater Perth Outwith Core Schedules 7 to 8. Greater Dundee Housing Market Area, Schedule 9. Highland Area Schedules 10 to 11. Kinross Area Schedules 12 and 13.
Second time lucky, Provost. I also have an amendment.
Good, you're paying attention, Councillor.
Thank you. May I begin by taking this opportunity to thank officers, in particular Brenda Murray and Peter Marshall, for their assistance in drafting this amendment. The effects of traffic from developments across Perth and Kinross are often one of the major concerns for our communities during the planning process. The vast majority of our constituents, I believe, are not against development per se, but rather want the reassurance that our local infrastructure will be able to cope with an increasing population and, in particular, an increasing number of vehicles. As we look at the development plan for the last time before it is considered by the Scottish Government's reporter, I think it is important that we as elected members are confident that it reflects these concerns. From the perspective of the Kinross Ward councillors, there are 3 roads in particular that require special consideration, given their routes through a number of villages and past local businesses. This amendment seeks to change the proposed response from the Council in Schedule 4, number 12A, to an objection by Councillor Barnacle. It asks the reporter to include references to the need for mitigation measures for 3 roads in Kinross, the A977, the A911 and the B9097. When considering this amendment today, it is important to bear in mind that the Council itself has already identified the need for mitigation on these 3 routes in a number of different ways. The A977, which goes from Kinross to Kinross's boundary with Clackmannanshire, passes through or past the settlements of Ballado, Drum, Crook of Devon, Rumbling Bridge, Powmill and Blairengone, and is used by many heavy goods vehicles that are travelling west. The Council has already drawn up a route action plan for the road, and a budget for mitigation measures has been identified in the Council's Composite Capital Programme. While all mitigation measures contained within the route action plan fall within the road boundary, this amendment seeks to ensure that any future developments that require traffic mitigation complement the mitigation identified in the route action plan. A route action plan has also been identified for the B9097, which runs from Drum to the Kinross's south-eastern boundary with Fife, through the RSPB Loch Leven Nature Reserve and alongside the Loch Leven Heritage Trail. It is important to note, however, that this route action plan was completed prior to the granting of planning permission for the Westfield development in Fife, which I shall return to in a moment. While there is no identified funding source specifically for this route action plan, work has already taken place to lower the speed limits in Drum and to improve drainage between Molemill and the end of Aldi Road. Again, this amendment seeks to ensure that plans for future development bear this route action plan in mind. In addition, while a route action plan for the A911 has not yet been developed, a number of road safety concerns have been identified on this road, which runs from Milnathort to Kinross's western boundary with Fife, through the villages of Kinneswood and Scotland Well. The constrained nature of these villages, its village centres, can often create conflicts between traffic and pedestrian movements. There is also long-standing issues around a safe pedestrian route along this road between Scotland Well and Kilmagadwood, and work is ongoing with the Community Council and council officers to address this issue. An explicit reference to these concerns in the plan would help to ensure that they are considered when determining future applications. Finally, but just as importantly, the amendment seeks to include reference to the pressures that arise from major developments out with Perth and Kinross, that nonetheless have a significant impact on our own roads. The Westfield development in Fife that has recently been given approval is a prime example of this. The decision to route heavy goods vehicles along the B9097 through a nature reserve and farms that straddle both sides of the road will cause significant problems for local residents, businesses and tourists. In an effort to address these concerns, such as these, within the scope of the plan, the amendment asks the reporter to update the plan to include a reference to the fact that such developments out with the council's boundary may necessitate the creation of new or updated route action plans, and that where development proposals arise adjacent to or in impacting upon a road for which there is a route action plan, cognizance should be taken of these plans. In conclusion, Provost, my Kinrossshire Ward councillor colleagues and I are confident that if the Scottish Government's reporter were to agree to this suggested change, it would not only provide greater clarity around the need for mitigation on these routes when future developments were considered, but it would also serve to provide reassurance to local residents and businesses that their concerns will be taken into account in the planning process. I hope that members across the Chamber today will feel able to support this amendment, and I'm happy to propose the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Do you have a seconder?
Yes, Provost, thank you. I'm happy to second the motion, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Budd. We'll carry on. We've got two more. Strathern Area Schedule 14, 15 and Strathmore Area Schedule 16 and 17. Are there any amendments in relation to recommendations 7 to 11? No. Can I ask you if a recess is required? Okay, I suggested 30 minutes earlier, perhaps 20 minutes is enough? Or would you like 30 minutes? 20 minutes is fine, okay. Partnership in room 410, SNP group 415, and the Independent Scottish Labour group in 413, all on 4th floor. Officers will be available to support members as required. Okay. Councillors, I think we're all here now. And that's not quite the 20 minutes, but I think we'd be, as we're all here, we'll just get started. I take it there'll be no further recess required. Yeah. Are there any further questions at this stage? No. Right, we'll now move to the debate. First of all, I'll seek clarification on the amendments from the Gillian Taylor, Head of Democratic Services, before the Council for debate. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Councillor Lyle, do you want to say anything?
Yep, just thank you, Provost. Say that personally, as neither of these amendments will delay the submission of the proposed local development plan, I'm happy to support them.
Thanks, Provost. I appreciate what the Leader of the Council says. However, I'm not prepared to accept incorporation of Amendment 1 into the motion. I think that would lead to a loss of control over development by councillors and an absence of influence over development circumstances by officers. I would much prefer that there was a debate in this chamber over that before we come to decision. Thank you.
You to clarify.
Councillor Barrett. For the motion?
Are you? You're not continuing the motion? That's what I heard.
I'm unclear what I'm being asked of here, Provost. I was asked whether I approved the incorporation of the amendments. I'm happy to accept Amendment 2, but not Amendment 1. I would prefer, in the case of Amendment 1, that the paper as proposed was passed by Council. I don't know what the impact of that is upon my seconding, and perhaps you can seek advice upon that.
I think we're seeking clarity from you, Councillor Barrett, on whether you're prepared to continue with your support for the remainder of the motion.
I'm prepared to maintain my support for the motion as proposed and seconded with the incorporation of Amendment 2, but not with the incorporation of Amendment 1.
Yeah, sorry, just to repeat my earlier statement, I'm happy to accept both amendments as they will not delay the submission of the local development plan. And all right. Apologies, Provost. Just to say that I'm happy to support the motion as proposed in the papers, and I'm also happy to support the 2 amendments in the papers.
Provost, I'm very happy to accept both amendments and support the motion.
Thank you. Just go to you.
No, Provost, no, not quite yet. I think perhaps it would be helpful to clarify that in that case, Amendment 1 stays on the table because it's not been incorporated into the motion. So Amendment 1 stays on the table. Amendment 2 has been incorporated into the motion. Members happy with that?
Provost, could I perhaps suggest that because the Leader of the Council has proposed the motion, that we ask for a different seconder and the motion becomes the motion with both amendments incorporated?
Chairman, Provost, we have a properly moved and seconded motion. We have properly moved and seconded amendments. The point is that the mover has accepted both of the amendments. The seconder is only accepting Amendment 2, so therefore Amendment 1 stays on the table, and that is the position that we are at procedurally. And we now go into debate on the motion and Amendment 1, where members are invited, obviously, to make contributions across the chamber to that debate. So there is no opportunity for a different motion or different amendments.
So we now invite comments and contributions to the debate. Deputy Provost.
Thanks, Provost. And thank you for the recess and the opportunity to discuss this matter again. With regard to the amendment, number 1, if we can call it that, from Councillor Stewart and Councillor Barnacle, that Schedule 4, number 02 policy 1D, set a strict limit on the number of houses. We spent a lot of time in the working group, which Councillor Stewart helpfully referred to. In fact, I think we had several debates on this about the range, about a range of housing. That was for several reasons. One, I think, was to help structure the expectations of the public, who, once they get fixed on a figure, find that becomes the holy grail a wee bit, and therefore find it difficult to perhaps move on from there. So I think the range was a move forward and give an indication both to the public and to developers and councillors and council officers what would be likely to be acceptable. Provost, we live in pretty changing times, and the next few years when this local development plan comes into being will be even one of more rapid change. Two of the big influences in change now is that we've got a lot of youngish people who want to move on in terms of the housing market, but are frustrated in doing that because of the price of houses and the size of houses. And secondly, we have people who are in fairly large houses who want to downsize. We need that flexibility, and there therefore is a crying need for smaller units and smaller houses in our communities. To some degree that's been acknowledged, but I think we have a long way still to go. And therefore there is a degree of flexibility that I think we should have in relation to density. We had an interesting discussion at the Planning Committee this morning on that very subject. Therefore, I think that putting a strict upper limit is not appropriate. I think the range is appropriate. I think it's up to a developer, if they want to exceed that, to come up with a set of reasons, an explanation, and exceptional circumstances might be the right phrase, to go beyond what the range is. But that shouldn't exclude us considering that. I think if we go for a strict upper limit, we'll have refusals issued by officers. We may have refusals put into reports. They'll be brought forward for debate that may or may not have been necessary. And I think there will be a higher level of appeals, and that will we have a risk of losing some of these, as everybody in the room knows. And therefore, it's better to keep the ball in our own court as far as making decisions on planning concern as much as humanly possible. I believe it's far better that councillors consider the merits and demerits of any application over the maximum, and only in exceptional circumstances would be approved or rejected. The route that's been suggested by the mover of the amendment, I think, is wrong, and I think that we should stick with the original proposal that was put forward in the papers that were issued to us. Thanks, Provost.
Any other comments? Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Provost. It's really a question I would like to ask Mr. Marshall, if I may. No. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Provost. My mind immediately goes back to the planning application for Pace Hill in Milnathort. In the LDP plan, it was proposed for 50 houses, which everyone in the local community were happy about. What happened when the planning application came forward? It was for 80-odd houses. And that incensed local people. They thought they'd come to an agreement with the council through the previous consultation in the LDP that was the number they could more or less accept. But all that putting that number in, 50 houses, developers see as a bargaining chip. And they say, oh, 50, well, let's try for 80, let's try for 90. And if we get 80, good and well. I think it's important that we actually set an upper limit for housing sites. We're putting this LDP plan 2 has been out for consultation. If developers were unhappy about the number of units set for a site, they'd every opportunity to come forward and challenge that. But they just see all they want is planning consent, outline planning consent for these sites. And they think once they get that, they can just manipulate the officers and this council to get what they want. And I've tried to halt these huge increases in numbers and housing sites in the past in my ward, and I've been stymied because I've been told, oh, they'll just appeal it and they'll get it, even though it's like 50, 60% more than is actually allocated for the site. So for that reason, and for that reason alone, I'm happy to support the amendment put forward by Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Provost. I have some sympathy for what the Deputy Provost just mentioned around us needing the numbers of houses. I support the amendment for the simple practical reason that I feel the upper bounds are already giving us enough houses, or as much will fit on a site. So to cite a parochial example in Instchur, which I represent, we have a live application at the moment that's gone to the Scottish Government Reporter because it seems it's perhaps not possible to fit the number of houses into the site that the developer wants to, and that number is already 10 short of what the upper bound in this new proposed plan is. And so therefore I feel that the upper bounds are already giving us developers enough leeway that they can fill the site and then more, because this developer is already applying at 10 fewer and is struggling to get it to be built because of noise concerns, essentially. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor McDade.
Thank you very much, Provost. I would like to echo what Councillor Robertson and what Councillor Stewart and Barnacle's original speeches said. I think the public of Perth and Kinross must have confidence in the process, and the numbers agreed in the plan are the numbers that will be applied, and that we run the risk of future apathy in response to future LDP processes if they do not feel that the consultation that they have been consulted on is what will actually be applied. And I also think, in response to some of the comments for the Deputy Provost, and I indeed share some of his concerns about housing for younger people, of which I am one, struggling to find housing locally, that, you know, the issues we have are also around what type of future housing we're going to have, and if we allow developers to cram ridiculous numbers of houses onto sites, there is no amenity there, there is no space for children to play, there is no space to hang washing out and all these sorts of things, and that the upper range, as Councillor Bailey just said, does allow for that exceptional circumstances to come forward and apply a higher range, so I support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Provost. This amendment, in a nutshell, seeks to restore public trust in the planning system. The MOG identified a problem that many of us have known about.
Sorry, Councillor Purvis, you've already spoken.
Yeah. Oh, so I can't speak in the debate?
No. Councillor Simpson.
I've been quiet so far, Provost, so I'll be okay. Yeah, thank you, Provost. With regards to Councillor Stewart and Councillor Barnacle's proposed amendment to Schedule 4, Number 2 and Policy 1D, I'm opposed to the amendment and would want the response submitted in unamended form with this regard. I think we need to disregard the hyperbole and the unfortunate language used, because at the heart of this amendment is who is in charge of local planning. If we specify a rigid maximum number of houses at any site, we effectively wash our hands of responsibility and hand over the decision to the reporter for applications over the maximum range. I believe it's far better that we as councillors consider the merits and demerits of any application over the maximum, and only in exceptional circumstances will an increase be approved or rejected. That route allows officers to scrutinise the application and the case for exceeding the maximum in detail, and it allows their professional views and recommendations to be considered and scrutinised by us, the councillors. We will be in control, Provost, not the reporter. Now, there may be superficial attractions to the amendment proposed by Councillor Stewart and Barnacle, but a deeper or more cynical analysis would be that this is a populist measure enabling councillors to point the finger of blame for unpopular planning decisions at the Scottish Government and the reporter, rather than face the consequences of our own decisions ourselves. I suspect, Provost, that it will cost the Council dear in terms of its planning performance with regards to decision timetables. It will cost the Council dear in defending more planning appeals, and we will lose more planning appeals, and that we should reject it. You need look no further than Scone for an example of the awful consequences of allowing the reporter to express a view of any kind, Provost. I think we should reject this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. It's a very difficult one here, but whilst I wholeheartedly agree that many communities have felt aggrieved seeing the indicative figures and then saying you've gone away over that, we've all been through that already, it must be borne in mind that these ranges were made with the presumption, as it is in the rest of the development plan, whereby in exceptional circumstances, and that being the case, these exceptional circumstances have not had to be considered in the making up of these ranges at this point in time and cannot be changed at this point in time. Therefore, to have the amendment go through, we put ourselves in a difficult position were we to be presented with a case of exceptional circumstances. If you can all follow what I'm trying to say here. We are stuck with these ranges now. We must consider that these ranges have not been allowed to consider exceptional circumstances. Had we been free to adjust them, fine, we could have taken them to the absolute limits under exceptional circumstances, but we can't. Therefore, I cannot support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Any other contributions? Okay. Councillor Lyle, could you sum up, please, as mover of the motion?
Thank you very much, Provost. I have little to say, as the amendments are self-explanatory, or Amendment 1 anyway was self-explanatory and has been debated by others, and the view of the councillors who have spoken is clear. So therefore I'm happy to just repeat my position. I'm happy to support both amendments and the motion, as neither amendment will delay the proposed local development plan submission.
Thank you. Councillor Shires? No. No, sorry, okay. Now, over to you.
Thank you, Provost. We have a motion by Councillor Lyle that the Council approve the recommendations in Report 18/263. You have that motion seconded by Councillor Peter Barrett. But Councillor Lyle has agreed to, Councillor Barrett and Councillor Lyle have agreed to accept Amendment 2, which was moved by Councillor Purvis, seconded by Councillor Waters. You have an amendment, Amendment 1, which is still on the table, and that was the amendment by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Barnacle, with regard to the proposed site capacity ranges, the terms of which had been previously circulated to members. In terms of standing orders, the vote is by roll call. So when I call your name, can you please indicate whether you are voting for the motion, for Amendment 1, or whether you are abstaining? Councillor Ahern.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bailey.
Amendment.
Councillor Baird. Councillor Band.
Motion.
Councillor Barnacle.
Motion.
Councillor Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Braun.
Amendment.
Point of order.
Sorry, Councillor Braun, I didn't catch what you said there.
Point of order, Gillian.
Sorry, I'm waiting to, sorry.
I'm actually misunderstood the direction.
Provost, that's a matter for you to rule on whether you wish to
Can you repeat
accept
what
a
you
change.
just said, Councillor?
I misunderstood the direction in casting my vote previously. I'm confused that we've got a motion and 2 amendments, and we're voting on 2 stages.
Understood,
So
we
I'm
had a
confused.
motion against an amendment.
I should have said amendment, not motion.
Are you prepared to accept the change?
Yeah, I think we'll have to, yeah.
My apologies about that.
Okay. So we're all clear, are we, before we move on? Right, I think we'll ask the Head of Democratic
Apologies
Services
if I
to do that.
did not make the position clear. You have a motion on the table which had been moved by Councillor Lyle, seconded by Councillor Barrett. You then had 2 amendments which were put to Council, one by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Barnacle, which with regard to site capacity ranges or site density ranges. You then had a second amendment by Councillor Purvis, seconded by Councillor Waters, with regard to the road action plans. That second amendment was accepted by both the mover and the seconder of the motion, and therefore has become part of the motion. However, the seconder of the motion indicated that he was not prepared to accept Amendment 1, and therefore Amendment 1 remained on the table for the debate. What we are now voting on is the motion with the inclusion of Amendment 2 and the Amendment 1 by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Barnacle, with regard to site density ranges. So when I ask you to, apologies, clearly there are points of order.
Sorry, just to clarify then, for everyone's understanding, If we vote for Amendment 1, yeah, no, absolutely, Gillian, I don't sympathise entirely. If we vote for Amendment 1, that is for Amendment 1 be included within the motion, and it votes for the entirety of the package, as it were. Yes, that class. Yes. Thank you very much.
Apologies if that wasn't clear, that would then... My apologies if it wasn't clear that Amendment 1 would then become part of the Council's decision if that was successful.
Thank you very much.
Just to clarify. So
it's far better let's get it clarified.
So there's no uncertainty. If Amendment 1 is carried, then the whole motion plus Amendment 1 is carried, or do we need to proceed to another vote on the motion as amended? No? Right. So
if the amendment is successful, then it will be part of the motion. That will be part of the Council's decision. Would councillors like me to start again with the roll call vote? Good, because I would like to start again with the roll call.
Can I just say, members, if you're even slightest bit of doubt, let's get it clear. Just don't be frightened to ask. Let's get it clear. We'll have to get it right. Councillor sorry, Bob. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Convener. Sorry, Provost.
Can you stand up, please, Councillor?
My query is the fact that do we have a seconder for the second motion, the second amendment, sorry, since Councillor Barrett did second the motion and the amendment.
We are clear that we have properly moved and seconded motion and amendment before the Council.
Is there anybody, even with the slightest bit, let's get it clear? You've got a smile on your face, Dave. No? Okay, we'll move to the... Right, we'll start again.
We'll start again. Councillors, when I call your name, could you please indicate whether you're voting for the motion with the inclusion of Amendment 2 or for Amendment 1 to be included in the motion, or whether you're abstaining? Councillor Ahern.
Amendment 1.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Amendment 1.
Councillor Bailey.
Amendment.
Councillor Baird. Councillor Band.
Motion.
Councillor Barnacle.
Amendment.
Councillor Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Braun.
Amendment.
Councillor Brock. Amendment. Councillor Audrey Coates.
Amendment.
Councillor Harry Coates.
Amendment.
Councillor Donaldson.
Amendment.
Councillor Dugan.
Amendment.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Forbes.
Amendment.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth.
Amendment.
Councillor James.
Amendment.
Councillor Jarvis.
Amendment.
Councillor Ling.
Amendment.
Councillor Lyle.
Amendment.
Councillor McCall.
Amendment.
Councillor McCall.
Amendment.
Councillor McDade.
Amendment.
Councillor McEwen.
Amendment.
Provost.
Amendment.
Councillor Parrott.
Amendment.
Councillor Pover. Amendment. Councillor Purvis.
Amendment.
Councillor Rebeck.
Amendment.
Councillor Reid.
Amendment.
Councillor Robertson.
Amendment.
Councillor Shires. Councillor Simpson.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Waters.
Amendment.
Councillor Williamson.
Amendment.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Thank you, councillors. I have 5 votes for the motion, 33 votes for Amendment 1. Amendment 1 therefore becomes included in the Council's decision.
Thank you, councillors. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.